If you clicked on this video, you probably belong in one of three camps. You probably figured out by now that I'm referring to the game's difficulty, and so you either clicked on this video because you think Shadow of the Erdtree is too hard, you think the game's difficulty is just fine and we should just get good, or this video randomly started autoplaying and now you're stuck with a random Greek man with a mediocre accent rambling about Elden Ring. Whichever the case may be, this video will have a little something for you. Throughout FromSoft's Sekiro, Soulsborne, Ring franchise, there always seems to be pushback either from the players or the developers. FromSoft releases a difficult game, players master it after a while, and then From Software releases an even more difficult game. Even though difficulty is largely subjective, I'd argue that Dark Souls is harder than Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2 doesn't count, Bloodborne is harder than Dark Souls 3 is harder than Bloodborne, and I think you get the point. Using this logic, we knew that Shadow of the Erdtree would be harder than the base game. Now you could argue that this is just DLC, but there's so much content here that you could call this Elden Ring 2, and I doubt a lot of people would mind. The DLC is obviously hard, and initially I was in the camp that thought that it was too much so. I tried to beat Shadow of the Erdtree without any summons. While I managed to beat the first 3 bosses and the Putrescent Knight without any help, Mesmer had other plans about my playthrough. For the life of me, I couldn't beat him. Not only was I not doing enough damage, I had to dodge a 20-hit combo just to get a chance to heal, and then another one just so I could get a singular hit in that did minuscule damage. After not even being able to get Mesmer down to half health, I caved and started using all of the tools at my disposal. I summoned my Mimic and the fight's NPC just to give myself the chance to not return to the Grace after a 30-second fight. After beating him and the next mandatory boss, I reached the final boss. As you might expect, he beat me so badly that I started rethinking if buying my first Souls game in 2015 was a good idea. That's where I stopped my playthrough for the day. Before going to sleep, I wanted to see how people online were reacting to the game. You had mixed reviews on Steam as well as discourse on Twitter regarding both sides of the difficulty argument, but that's not what caught my attention. What did catch my eye was a tweet by Bandai Namco, the game's publisher, reminding us to collect Erdtree fragments. Erdtree fragments are items scattered around the DLC's open world that simultaneously buff your attack power and reduce the damage you receive when you get hit. It was From Software's way of balancing out all builds for the DLC, and I had been completely ignoring them. So I left the final boss and went on a journey to collect all fragments before returning. That's when the DLC clicked for me. I found an abundance of new areas, incredible boss fights, as well as new weapons. Shadow of the Erdtree's world is deceptively massive. The world has layers upon layers of things to explore and discover. Exploring the Land of Shadow also led me to another realization. I was not playing a Souls-like anymore. I was playing Zelda. Think about it, in the 2 most recent Zelda games, you collect Spirit Orbs in order to increase both health and stamina, with the end goal of getting strong enough to defeat Ganon. In Shadow of the Erdtree, you essentially do the same thing, with a few names switched around. Obviously Breath of the Wild was a big inspiration to FromSoft when making Elden Ring, but its influence has never been felt more. Promised Consul Radahn was my Ganon, and I was going to explore as much as I could to beat him. Some of the optional bosses are also some of the best to ever appear in a Souls game. Bale may have become my favorite fight in a FromSoft game, but I will wait for recency bias to subside before I can definitely say that. After finding all of the Erdtree fragments, I triumphantly returned to Radahn and got stomped. Again, but this time I didn't have any excuses. At this point, I did the only thing left for me to do. I looked up the best anti-Radahn class and beat him after another 30 minutes, only to get a cliffhanger ending. At least this probably confirms a real sequel to Elden Ring is on the horizon. So, is Elden Ring's DLC too hard? I wouldn't say so. Yeah, some bosses can be real roadblocks, but in about a month's time, we'll know all of their weaknesses and how to exploit them. And so, the pushback circle will be continued. Overall, I really enjoyed Shadow of the Erdtree after getting over my initial shock, but I would like to raise one last point about the DLC's replayability. I wanted to play it again after I finished it, but didn't want to go through collecting all 50 fragments again or even getting back to Moog just so I could access the whole thing. The main game has a similar thing with Sacred Tears and Golden Seeds, but you have to collect a lot less of these to stand a good chance against the endgame bosses. I want to replay the DLC, but maybe a few months down the line. I just don't have the same urge to play it again like I did with the base game. However, what could From Software do at this point? The Erdtree fragments are there to make sure that you're not going to be over leveled for the DLC. Simultaneously though, they act as a big roadblock if you want to experience Shadow of the Erdtree again. It's a pretty smart solution for a player's first playthrough, and I know that they carry over between New Game Plus saves, but I wanted to bring in different builds to try. I guess we'll see how the fragments will impact the DLC over time. And that was my analysis on Shadow of the Erdtree. If you want to continue your Elden Ring binge, click this video to get my thoughts on the base game. See you in the next one.